The royal decree arrived at dawn, sealed with blood and bound by pack law. Prince Cadwalladen's son would never inherit the throne unless he spoke before his 3rd birthday, now only 7 days away. The physicians had tried everything. Potions brewed from moonflower and sage. Incantations whispered by the eldest healers of the Gwinnett pack. Even the forbidden rituals passed down through bloodlines, so ancient their origins had dissolved into legend. Nothing worked. Little Pryderi sat in his wheeled chair by the castle's eastern window, golden eyes tracking the ravens outside, lips pressed together in eternal silence. But here's what no one knew yet. What would shatter everything they believed about forbidden bloodlines and the hierarchy that had ruled their world for 800 years? Before we go further, tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. Because what happens next? You're going to need it. The Omega entered the throne room on a Tuesday morning, and the air itself seemed to shift. His name was Bedwer. No family name, no pack designation, just Bedwer, which was how you knew he belonged to no one. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, unbound and wild, a direct violation of the court's grooming laws that required all Omegas to wear braids marking their status. He wore common clothes, rough-spun wool the color of storm clouds, and his feet were bare against the polished marble floor. King Cadwalladen's hand went to his sword hilt instinctively. Around the room the royal guard tensed. Omegas didn't simply walk into the throne room. They were summoned, presented, controlled. They certainly didn't enter uninvited with their chins lifted and their scent, God's that scent, rolling through the chamber like morning mist through a pine forest. "You will leave," Cadwaladen said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "or you will be removed." Bedwer's eyes, an impossible shade of amber that seemed to catch and hold the light, fixed on the king with something that wasn't quite defiance but wasn't submission either. "I'm here about your son," he said simply. The room erupted. 3 guards moved forward simultaneously. The High Counselor Owain shot to his feet, his face purpling with rage. The Queen, Cadwalladen's mate Rhiannon, made a sound low in her throat that was pure alpha warning. But Pryderi, sitting in his wheelchair near his mother's throne, went completely still. His small hands gripped the armrests. His golden eyes locked onto the Omega with an intensity that made every person in that room suddenly, viscerally uncomfortable. "The child is none of your concern," Rhiannon said, and her voice could have cut glass. "You will address the king properly, Omega, or you will be thrown into the dungeons beneath this castle where not even your screams will reach the surface." Bedwer didn't flinch, didn't bow, didn't do any of the 100 small gestures of submission that had been beaten into Omegas since the Great Pack Wars 3 centuries ago. "Your son is dying," he said flatly. "Not his body, his soul. And you know it." The silence that followed was absolute. Cadwalladen's hand tightened on his sword, knuckles white. But he didn't draw it. Because despite every instinct screaming at him to remove this insolent Omega from his sight, despite the breach of protocol so severe it bordered on treason, the Omega was right. Everyone in this room knew it. The physicians knew it. The healers knew it. Rhiannon knew it, though she'd sooner cut out her own tongue than admit weakness in her bloodline. Pryderi wasn't ill in any way the healers could treat. He was fading, pulling inward, disappearing into himself day by day while his body remained trapped in a chair his legs refused to obey. "Who sent you?" Owain demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. "What pack do you serve?" "No one sent me," Bedwer replied. "I serve no pack. Follow no alpha. I'm here because..." He stopped. His eyes drifted to Pryderi, and something shifted in his expression. Something almost like recognition, though they'd never met. Could never have met. "I'm here because he called me," Bedwer finished softly. Rhiannon laughed, sharp and bitter. "The child doesn't speak. That's rather the problem, Omega. He can't call anyone." "Not with words," Bedwer agreed. "But there are older ways of calling. Ways that predate your pack laws and blood oaths. Ways that your kind tried very hard to erase when you rewrote the histories after the purge." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. No one spoke of the purge. Not openly. Not in the throne room where every word was recorded by the court scribes. The purge was ancient history, a dark chapter when the Alpha Packs had risen up and slaughtered thousands of Omegas who'd refused to submit to the new order. The official histories called it a restructuring. Everyone else called it what it was, genocide. "You will not speak of such things here," Cadwallon said, and now his voice carried the full weight of his Alpha command, that supernatural force that could bring even the strongest wolves to their knees. "You will leave immediately, or I will have you executed for sedition." Bedwyr swayed slightly under the force of that command, the first real sign that he was subject to the same biological imperatives as every other Omega in the kingdom. But he didn't fall. Didn't submit. Instead, he turned those amber eyes directly on the king and said, "Then execute me. But do it after I've proven I can help your son. Give me 1 hour with the child. 1 hour alone in the garden. If he doesn't speak, if nothing changes, then I'll walk to the executioner's block myself." "Absolutely not," Rhiannon snarled. She'd moved in front of Pryderi's wheelchair, every inch of her body screaming protective Alpha. "You think I'd allow some rogue Omega alone with my son? You could be an assassin. By Mother." The word was barely a whisper, barely even a sound, but it cut through the Queen's tirade like a blade through silk. Everyone's head snapped toward the wheelchair. Pryderi's mouth was open. His small chest heaved with effort. His hands trembled on the armrests. "Mother," he whispered again, and his voice was rough from disuse, cracking on the single word. "Please." Rhiannon's face went absolutely white. Cadwallon crossed the distance to his son in 3 long strides, dropping to his knees beside the wheelchair. His massive hands that had ended lives on battlefields across the continent, shook as they cupped his son's face. "Pryderi," he breathed. "My son." But Pryderi wasn't looking at his father. His eyes were still locked on Bedwyr, and in them was something that looked almost like desperation. "Please," the child whispered again. And just like that, the entire foundation of Cadwallon's world, the certainty, the pack law, the divine right of Alphas to rule, cracked straight down the middle. The garden was ancient, older even than the castle itself. Stone paths wound between beds of night-blooming jasmine and blood roses, those rare flowers that only grew where violence had been done to the earth. At its center stood a fountain depicting the first Alpha, Lywarch the Conqueror, his stone foot planted on the neck of a prostrate Omega. Bedwyr wheeled Pryderi past that fountain without looking at it. They were not alone, despite the agreement. Guards lined the garden walls, crossbows loaded, arrows trained on Bedwyr's back. Rhiannon watched from the eastern balcony, her eyes never leaving her son. Owain stood beside her, his hand on the communication crystal that could summon every guard in the castle with a single pulse of magic. But the space immediately around the Omega and the child, that was theirs alone. Bedwyr settled on a stone bench beneath an ancient oak, its branches so old they'd grown twisted and gnarled, reaching toward the earth as if trying to return to it. He didn't position Pryderi's wheelchair in front of him like a barrier. Instead, he pulled it close, angled it so they sat side by side, both facing the fountain. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Bedwyr said very quietly, "Your name isn't really Pryderi, is it?" The child's breath hitched. "Oh, it's your name now," Bedwyr continued, his voice soft and unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world. "The name they gave you when you were born. The name in all the official records. The name that marks you as heir to the throne of Gwynedd. But it's not the name your soul knows. Not the one you hear in dreams." Pryderi's small hands clenched into fists. "I had a different name once too," Bedwyr said. "Before I was Bedwyr. Before I was anything. I was someone else. Someone who didn't exist anymore after the night they came for my pack." His voice remained steady, but something in it made the child turn to look at him fully. "I was 7 years old when they burned our village," Bedwyr said. "The Alphas came at midnight, carrying torches and singing hymns about purification and divine order. They said we were contaminated, corrupted. That our bloodline carried the old magic, the magic from before the pack laws, and that magic was an abomination against nature. He paused, and in that pause, centuries of grief seemed to settle over the garden. They killed everyone, he said simply. My parents, my siblings, the elders who'd taught me the old songs, the healers who'd shown me how to read the patterns in tree bark and stone. Everyone who carried the knowledge of what we'd been before the Alphas rewrote history. Pryderi made a small sound in the back of his throat. I survived because I hid, Bedwyr continued. Crawled into a root cellar and pulled the door shut and listened to my family scream. I was there for 3 days before I dared come out. And when I did, his hands, which had been resting loosely in his lap, curled into fists. When I came out, I found they'd erected a monument. Right there in the center of our village, in the ashes of our homes. A stone marker declaring that this place had been cleansed of corruption. That the contaminated bloodline had been eliminated for the good of all wolf kind. He looked at Pryderi directly now, and his amber eyes were blazing. They erased us, he said. Not just killed us, erased us. As if we'd never existed. As if our magic, our history, our way of life had never mattered at all. The child's chest was heaving now, small breaths coming fast and shallow. But here's what they didn't know, Bedwyr said, and now his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The old magic doesn't die just because they kill everyone who carries it. Goes dormant, hides, and sometimes, very rarely, it resurfaces in a bloodline they thought they'd successfully bred out of existence. He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and rested his hand on the arm of Pryderi's wheelchair. Your mother is pure alpha bloodline, he said. Noble, powerful, exactly what an alpha should be according to pack law. But your father, Pryderi went absolutely rigid. Your father's grandmother was from my village, Bedwyr said softly. She escaped the purge because she was already mated to an alpha, already pregnant with his child. She hid what she was, suppressed her magic, raised her children to be perfect alphas who never questioned the pack laws. And it worked, for 3 generations. That bloodline produced nothing but strong, dominant alphas. He leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. Until you. The word hung in the air between them like a living thing. The magic resurfaced in you, Bedwyr said. Not alpha magic. Not omega magic. The old magic. The magic from before they divided us into hierarchies and told us some wolves were born to rule while others were born to serve. And your body, your beautiful perfect body, it can't hold both. Can't be what they demand you to be while also being what you actually are. Pryderi was shaking now, violent tremors running through his small frame. So you withdrew, Bedwyr said. Pulled inward. Stopped speaking, stopped walking, stopped participating in a world that has no place for what you are. Because some part of you, the oldest, truest part, knows that to speak is to reveal yourself. To reveal the magic that got my entire village burned to ash. A single tear tracked down Pryderi's cheek. But I'm here to tell you something, Bedwyr said. And now his hand moved from the wheelchair to cover the child's small fist. You are not an abomination. You are not corrupted. You are not wrong. You are magic itself, the real magic, the kind that predates their laws and their hierarchies and their monuments built on mass graves. He squeezed the small hand gently. And I can teach you how to be both. How to carry that magic and still survive in their world. How to speak without revealing everything you are. How to walk without letting them see the power in every step. Pryderi's mouth opened, closed, opened again. How? He whispered, and his voice was stronger now, less cracked. How do you hide? Ah, Bedwyr said, and for the first time since entering the throne room he smiled. That's the question, isn't it? The one your parents should have asked instead of dragging you to healers and making you drink potions. How do you hide in plain sight? He glanced up at the balcony where Rhiannon watched, then back at the child. First, he said, you have to understand what you're hiding from. The alphas aren't stupid. They know the old magic still exists in trace amounts. But they're not looking for it in you. They can't imagine it would resurface in a prince, in the heir to the throne, in someone with your bloodline. That's your first protection, their own arrogance. Pryderi nodded slowly. Second, Bedwyr continued, you have to give them what they expect to see. Sick child. A damaged prince. Someone to pity. Someone who almost meets their expectations but falls just short enough to be dismissed as defective rather than dangerous. The child's eyes widened with understanding. You weren't broken, he whispered. You were hiding. Exactly, Bedwyr said. And now you're going to learn to do the same. I'm going to teach you to walk, but not in the way your physical therapists wanted. I'm going to teach you to speak, but not in the way your parents demanded. I'm going to teach you to be exactly what they need you to be while remaining exactly what you are. He leaned back slightly, studying the child's face. But I need you to understand something first, he said seriously. This isn't a game. If they discover what you are, what we both are, they won't just imprison us. They'll erase us, just like they erased my village. They'll rewrite history so completely that no one will even remember we existed. Then why help me? Pryderi asked, and the question was so direct, so painfully honest, that several of the guards shifted uncomfortably. Why risk yourself? Bedwyr was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm tired of hiding alone, he finally said. Because I'm tired of being the last one. Because when I felt your magic calling across the kingdom, that desperate, lonely pulse of power that was so much like my own, I thought maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to be the last anymore. He squeezed the child's hand again. So here's what we're going to do, he said. I'm going to teach you everything I know. Every trick, every defense, every way to move through their world without triggering their instincts. And in return you're going to survive. You're going to grow up. You're going to become king. And when you do... He trailed off, and in that moment, Pryderi saw something in the Omega's eyes that was pure, burning hope. When you do, Bedwyr said softly, you're going to change everything. The first lesson began immediately. Stand up, Bedwyr said. Pryderi's eyes went wide. I can't. Yes, you can, Bedwyr interrupted gently. Your legs work perfectly. Every physician who's examined you has confirmed it. The problem isn't your body. It's the magic running through it, fighting against itself because you're trying to be what they demand instead of what you are. He stood, then held out both hands. Take my hands, he said. Trust me. Trust the magic. Pryderi hesitated. Around the garden, guards tensed. On the balcony, Rhiannon leaned forward, her hands gripping the stone railing hard enough to crack it. Then, moving slowly, Pryderi reached up and placed his small hands in Bedwyr's larger ones. The moment their skin touched, something happened. The air around them seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from summer stone. The flowers in the nearest bed suddenly bloomed, every bud opening simultaneously in a cascade of color. The ancient oak's branches creaked and groaned, leaves rustling though there was no wind. And Pryderi stood. Not smoothly, not easily. His legs shook violently. His balance was terrible, and he would have fallen immediately if Bedwyr hadn't been holding him. But he stood. Rhiannon made a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a cry, and started toward the stairs. Don't, Owain said sharply, grabbing her arm. Not yet. Let's see what happens. My son is standing, Owain said. For the first time in his life. Do you really want to interrupt that? Rhiannon's jaw clenched, but she stayed put. Below in the garden, Bedwyr was talking softly, his voice too low for anyone on the balcony to hear. Feel that, he was saying. That's your magic recognizing mine. The old magic doesn't distinguish between Alpha and Omega. Those are new categories, inventions of the pack laws. The old magic just is. Flows. Connects. It recognizes itself. Pryderi's legs were still shaking, but the tremors were lessening. Now, Bedwyr said, I'm going to teach you the most important skill you'll ever learn. How to partition yourself. How to keep part of your magic active and aware while presenting a completely different face to the world. I don't understand, Pryderi whispered. You will, Bedwyr promised. Close your eyes. Feel the magic flowing between us. That's the real you, wild, powerful, unlimited. Now imagine building a wall around it. Not to suppress it, not to kill it, but just to contain it. To keep it safe and hidden. Pryderi's face scrunched up in concentration. Not a wall of stone, Bedwyr corrected gently. They'll sense that. A wall of water. Something that flows, that adapts, that looks transparent but actually hides everything beneath its surface. Long seconds passed. Then, gradually, the shimmer in the air began to fade. The flowers stopped blooming. The oak's branches settled into stillness. And Pryderi opened his eyes. Good, Bedwyr said. Now step forward. The child's right foot moved. Shakily, uncertainly, but it moved. Then his left. Then his right again. He was walking. It wasn't pretty. He lurched and stumbled. His movements were uncoordinated, and Bedwyr had to support most of his weight. But his legs were working. He was moving forward on his own power. On the balcony, Rhiannon's hands flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. Cadwallon, who'd joined her, stood frozen. His expression unreadable. After 3 steps, Pryderi's legs gave out. Bedwyr caught him easily, lowering him back into the wheelchair with practiced gentleness. That's enough for today, he said. You did beautifully. But I only took 3 steps, Pryderi protested. 3 steps more than you took yesterday, Bedwyr replied. Magic isn't about grand gestures. It's about small victories that accumulate into something unstoppable. Tomorrow we'll try for 4 steps, then 5, then 6, and eventually, he smiled. Eventually, you'll walk into that throne room on your own 2 feet, and everyone will call it a miracle. They'll say the gods blessed you. The healers will take credit. Your parents will weep with joy. And none of them will ever suspect the truth. Pryderi looked up at him with something like awe. You've done this before, he said. Didn't. Survived. For 17 years, Bedwyr confirmed. Since the night they burned my village. I've walked among them, invisible in plain sight, waiting for something. I didn't know what. But now I think I do. He knelt beside the wheelchair so their eyes were level. I was waiting for you, he said simply. The hour ended. Guards escorted Bedwyr back to the throne room where Cadwallon and Rhiannon waited. The king's face was carefully neutral, but Rhiannon's eyes were red from crying. He walked, she said, and her voice broke on the words. My son walked. 3 steps, Bedwyr confirmed. Tomorrow he'll take more. Within a month, he'll be strong enough to walk from his chambers to the dining hall. Within 3 months, he'll be able to stand through an entire court ceremony. And before his 3rd birthday, he paused for effect. Before his 3rd birthday, he'll speak before the entire court and claim his birthright as heir to the throne. Cadwallon and Rhiannon exchanged a look. Something passed between them too quick and complex for Bedwyr to read. What do you want in return? Cadwallon asked bluntly. Omegas don't help royalty out of kindness. Name your price. I want nothing, Bedwyr said. Liar, Rhiannon snapped. Everyone wants something. Bedwyr met her eyes steadily. Then perhaps I'm not everyone, he said. Owain, who'd been watching this exchange with narrowed eyes, stepped forward. You'll stay in the castle, he said. It wasn't a question. Under guard. You'll treat the prince daily, but you'll have no contact with anyone else. You'll take your meals in your chambers. You'll speak to no one about the prince's condition or treatment. And if at any point we suspect you're doing anything that threatens this family or this kingdom, you'll be executed immediately. Are these terms acceptable? Bedwyr considered for a moment, then nodded. Acceptable, he said. Good, Owain said. Then, with one addition, Bedwyr interrupted. The High Counselor's expression darkened. You're in no position to negotiate, Omega. I need access to the royal library, Bedwyr said calmly. Specifically, the restricted section. The histories from before the purge. The room went deadly quiet. Absolutely not, Cadwallon said. Those texts are sealed for a reason. The information they contain is dangerous, seditious. Essential, Bedwyr interrupted. If you want your son to fully recover, I need to understand the full scope of what I'm working with. The old magic isn't well documented in your approved texts. For obvious reasons. Rhiannon's lip curled. You want us to give you access to forbidden knowledge so you can use our son as an experiment. I want you to give me the tools I need to save your son's life, Bedwyr corrected. You can station guards outside the library. You can have scholars observe me while I read. You can copy every single page I look at and have your own researchers analyze it. But I need access to those histories. Cadwallon and Rhiannon looked at each other again. Some silent conversation passed between them, the kind only mates who'd been bonded for decades could have. Finally, Cadwallon turned back to Bedwyr. 1 hour per day, he said. Under guard. Any book you request must be approved by the High Counselor first. And if we discover you're using that knowledge for anything other than treating Pryderi, your execution won't be quick. Understood, Bedwyr said. Then we have an agreement, Owain said. He gestured to the guards. Take him to the East Wing. The chambers there are secure and isolated. Station 6 guards outside his door at all times. As the guards moved to either side of him, Bedwyr allowed himself one final look at the royal family. Cadwallon stood rigid, every inch the warrior king. Rhiannon's hand rested on her mate's arm, her expression guarded. And Owain watched everything with eyes that missed nothing. One more thing, Bedwyr said as the guards began to lead him away. What? Cadwallon asked. Your son is stronger than you think, Bedwyr said. Braver. More resilient. The magic inside him, it's not a curse. It's a gift. One day you'll see that. I just hope it's not too late when you do. Then he was gone, escorted through the castle's marble corridors toward whatever gilded cage they'd prepared for him. Behind him in the throne room, silence reigned. Finally Rhiannon spoke. He knows, she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. About the bloodline. About your grandmother. Impossible, Cadwallon said. We destroyed every record. Killed everyone who knew. There's no way. He knows, Rhiannon repeated. And if he knows, others might know. Others who won't be content to simply help our son. Others who'll see this as an opportunity to resurrect the old ways, to challenge pack law itself. Owain stepped between them, his expression grave. Then we need to know exactly what he knows, he said. And more importantly, who else knows it? I'll have my people investigate his background, find out where he came from, who he's been in contact with. And if your investigation reveals he's part of some larger movement, Rhiannon asked. Owain's smile was cold. Then we'll have a very public execution, he said. And make sure everyone understands what happens to those who challenge the natural order. The chambers they gave Bedwyr were luxurious by Omega standards. A private bedroom, a sitting area, even a small balcony overlooking the castle gardens. But the door was solid oak reinforced with iron, and the 6 guards stationed outside never moved, never spoke, never even seemed to breathe. It was a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. Bedwyr stood at the balcony railing, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Somewhere in this castle, Pryderi was probably being examined by physicians, poked and prodded as they tried to determine how an Omega had succeeded where they'd failed. Somewhere else, Owain's agents were probably already digging into Bedwyr's past, searching for connections and conspiracies. And deep beneath the castle, in dungeons no one spoke about, other Omegas who defied pack law were probably being reminded of their place in the hierarchy. Bedwyr's hands tightened on the railing. He hadn't lied to Pryderi, not exactly. He had survived the purge. He had hidden for 17 years. He did carry the old magic. But he'd left out one crucial detail. He wasn't just a survivor. He was the last of the keepers, the ancient order of magic users who'd maintained the balance between alphas, betas, and omegas before the pack laws were written. His grandmother hadn't just been from the same village as Cadwallan's grandmother. She'd been the High Keeper, the one who'd held all the secrets, all the knowledge, all the power. And before she died, before the alphas dragged her to the center of the village and burned her alive while her family watched, she'd passed everything to Bedwer. Every spell, every ritual, every piece of forbidden knowledge. Including the one spell the alphas feared most. The spell that could undo the pack laws themselves. It was woven into the very fabric of their society now, written into their biology through generations of forced breeding and magical manipulation. The spell that made alphas dominant, omegas submissive, and the hierarchy natural rather than imposed. And Bedwer knew how to break it. He'd known since he was 7 years old, hiding in that root cellar, listening to his grandmother's final words echoing in his mind like a prophecy. The spell can only be broken by one who carries both bloodlines, she told him. Alpha and Keeper, merged in a single individual. They tried to breed us out of existence, but blood always finds a way. Watch for the sign, a child who can't walk, can't speak, can't function in their world. That child will be the one. Key. And when you find them, she'd gripped his small hand so hard it hurt. When you find them, you teach them everything. You wake the old magic in them. You help them become what they were always meant to be. And then, together, you burn their entire world to ash. Bedwer had spent 17 years waiting for that child. And now he'd found him. Pryderi didn't know it yet. Probably wouldn't know it for years. But he wasn't just the heir to Gwynette's throne. He was the heir to something far older, far more powerful. He was the prophecy made flesh. And Bedwer was going to make sure he survived long enough to fulfill it. Behind him, one of the guards knocked on the door. "Evening meal," the man said gruffly. "Step away from the balcony." Bedwer turned, composed and calm, the perfect picture of an obedient Omega. "Of course," he said. He crossed to the small dining table where they'd left a covered tray. Simple food, bread, cheese, meat, but more than most Omegas received. They were treating him well, which meant they still needed him. But he needed them too. At least until Pryderi was strong enough. Until the old magic had fully awakened in the boy. Until everything was in place. Well, then the real work would begin. The first week passed without incident. Bedwer worked with Pryderi every morning in the garden, teaching him to walk, to speak, to control the magic that pulsed beneath his skin. The prince's progress was remarkable. By day 5, he could walk the length of the garden path unassisted. By day 7, he'd spoken full sentences in front of his parents, his voice clear and strong. The court physicians were baffled. The healers called it miraculous. Rhiannon wept openly with joy. And Cadwallan commissioned a portrait of the moment his son first walked, decreeing it would hang in the Great Hall for all of history to see. No one suspected the truth. No one except Owain. The High Counselor watched every session from the balcony, his eyes never leaving Bedwer. And every evening, he met with his network of spies and investigators, slowly piecing together the Omega's history. What he found disturbed him. Bedwer had appeared in the kingdom's records 17 years ago, found wandering near the southern border with no memory of his past. A family of farmers had taken him in, raised him as their own. He'd been quiet, obedient, unremarkable. Then 5 years ago that family had died in a fire. Accidental, the local authorities said. Bedwer had been in town when it happened, had an alibi, was cleared of any suspicion. But Owain had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts screamed that there was more to this story. He dug deeper. The farmer who'd taken Bedwer in had once served in the royal guard, had been stationed at a small outpost near the mountains, had been one of the soldiers assigned to suppress an uprising in a remote village. Owain's blood ran cold. He pulled the military records from that incident, read the sanitized reports, noted the date, 17 years ago. the exact time Bedwer had appeared at the border. He called for the most detailed records, the ones kept in the restricted archives, the ones that documented exactly what had happened that night. What he read made his hands shake. They'd called it a cleansing operation. A village of Omegas and Betas who'd been practicing corrupted magic. The king's decree had been absolute. Kill everyone. Leave no survivors. Burn the village to ash and salt the earth so nothing would grow there again. The operation had been successful. 234 confirmed kills. No survivors. But the report noted something odd. The head count was off by 1. They'd documented 235 residents in the weeks before the raid, but only 234 bodies were recovered. One person had escaped. Child they'd assumed. Maybe died in the wilderness. Maybe made it to another settlement and died there. Or maybe that child had survived. Had been found by a soldier with a guilty conscience. Had been hidden, protected, raised under a false identity. And was now standing in the royal garden, alone with the crown prince, teaching him magic that should have died 17 years ago. Owain stood from his desk, his decision made. He would wait. Let Bedwer cure the prince. They needed that. The kingdom needed an heir who could speak and walk. But once Pryderi was healthy, once the child had claimed his birthright before the court, then Bedwer would die. Publicly. Painfully. And his death would serve as a reminder to every Omega in the kingdom about the price of defying pack law. On the morning of the 8th day, everything changed. Bedwer arrived in the garden as usual, escorted by his 6 guards. Pryderi was already waiting, sitting in his wheelchair though he no longer needed it. His parents had insisted, better to maintain the appearance of illness until the official presentation before court. But something was wrong. Bedwer could feel it the moment he entered the garden. The air was too still. The birds were silent. And Pryderi's face was pale, his golden eyes wide with fear. What happened? Bedwer asked immediately, dismissing the guards with a wave. They retreated to the walls, far enough away to give privacy but close enough to intervene if needed. Pryderi's hands trembled on the wheelchair's armrests. "My father," he whispered. "Last night I heard him and Mother arguing. She wanted to bond me to an alpha family. Arrange a mating contract before my 3rd birthday." Bedwer went very still. "You're 2 years old," he said carefully. "Almost 3, Pryderi corrected. "And she said now that I can walk and speak, now that I'm fixed, it's time to secure my future. To make sure the bloodline continues properly." His voice broke on the last word. Bedwer knelt beside the wheelchair, his mind racing. This was bad. Worse than bad. If they bonded Pryderi to an alpha family now, while he was still so young, the bond would be unbreakable. It would suppress his magic permanently, would force him to develop into exactly what pack law demanded, a dominant alpha heir with no trace of the old ways. It would kill everything that made him special. "Did your father agree?" Bedwer asked. Pryderi shook his head. "He said I was too young, that there was time. But Mother..." He swallowed hard. "Mother said every day we wait is another day the magic could resurface. Another day I could relapse. She wants it done before anyone suspects what I really am." "She doesn't know what you are," Bedwer said firmly. "She suspects you're different, but she doesn't know about the old magic. If she did, you'd already be dead." The blunt words made Pryderi flinch, but Bedwer didn't soften them. The child needed to understand the stakes. "Listen to me carefully," Bedwer said. "We're running out of time. Your presentation before court is in 6 days. After that, your parents will have more freedom to make decisions about your future. We need to accelerate your training." "How?" Pryderi asked. "I'm going to teach you something I shouldn't," Bedwer said. "Something dangerous. Something that, if your parents discover it, will get us both killed immediately." He glanced at the guards on the walls, then back at Pryderi. "I'm going to teach you how to see the bonds," he said quietly. "The magical contracts that tie this entire kingdom together. The bonds between mates, between alphas and their packs, between the royal family and the land itself. Once you can see them, you can understand them. And once you understand them, he paused, you can break them. Pryderi's eyes went wide. That's impossible. The bonds are sacred. They're woven by the gods themselves. They're woven by magic, Bedwyr interrupted. Old magic, twisted and repurposed by the Alphas after the purge. The gods have nothing to do with it. It's a system of control, Pryderi. Beautiful, elegant, and absolutely artificial. He placed his hand over the child's heart. Close your eyes, he said. Reach for your magic. Not the surface level, not the part you've been using to walk and speak. Go deeper. Down to the core. To the place where your alpha blood and your keeper blood meet. Pryderi closed his eyes, his face screwing up in concentration. Deeper, Bedwyr urged. Past the fear. Past the conditioning. Past everything they've taught you about what you should be. Long seconds passed. Pryderi gasped. His eyes flew open, but they weren't focused on the garden anymore. They were seeing something else. Something invisible to everyone else. I see them, he breathed. The bonds. They're everywhere. Lines of light connecting everything. Mother to father. Father to the throne to the land. It's like a web. A massive, glowing web covering the entire kingdom. Yes, Bedwyr said. That's the true structure of pack law. Not the laws written in books or spoken in court. The actual magical architecture that enforces the hierarchy. Pryderi's gaze traveled across the garden, following lines only he could see. Then his eyes landed on Bedwyr, and he made a small sound of surprise. You don't have any, he said. No bonds at all. You're just free. I severed mine, Bedwyr said. The night my village burned. My grandmother taught me how, in those last moments before the soldiers found us. She said a keeper without bonds could move through the world unseen, untracked. It was the only way to survive. He squeezed Pryderi's shoulder gently. But you can't sever yours, he said. Not yet. You're too young, too visible. If your bonds suddenly disappeared, every alpha in the kingdom would sense it. They'd know something was wrong. Then what do I do? Pryderi asked. You learn to manipulate them, Bedwyr said. To make them appear stronger than they are. To create false bonds that satisfy their expectations while keeping your true self hidden. It's harder than severing them, more delicate, but it's the only way. He stood, offering his hand. Come, he said. Walk with me. I'll show you how. Pryderi took his hand and rose from the wheelchair. His legs were steady now, his balance perfect. To anyone watching from the walls, it looked like a simple walk through the garden. But with his magic sight active, Pryderi could see what Bedwyr was really showing him. The intricate dance of bonds that connected every living thing in the castle. How they pulsed and shifted. How they could be touched, adjusted, redirected. How they could be broken. Your mother wants to bond you to an alpha family, Bedwyr said as they walked. She'll choose someone young, probably from a powerful bloodline. The bond will be initiated now but won't fully activate until you both reach maturity. It's meant to ensure loyalty, compatibility, and proper genetic mixing. Can we stop it? Pryderi asked. No, Bedwyr said. If you refuse, they'll know something's wrong. Your mother already suspects you're not fully cured. Any resistance will confirm her fears. Pryderi's face fell. But, Bedwyr continued, we can make sure the bond is shallow, superficial. Something that satisfies pack law without actually restricting you. I'll teach you how to accept the bond while simultaneously creating barriers around your core self. The other alpha will feel bonded to you, but they won't have access to what you really are. They'd reached the fountain now, the monument to Lywart the Conqueror with his foot on the Omega's neck. Pryderi stared at it with new eyes, seeing the bonds carved into the very stone, magical signatures woven into the statue itself. This is a binding monument, he said slowly. It's not just a statue. It's reinforcing the hierarchy. Every Omega who walks past it feels the weight of that foot. Every alpha feels the righteousness of their dominance. Yes, Bedwer said. There are hundreds of these throughout the kingdom. Statues, buildings, even certain trees planted in specific patterns. The entire physical landscape is designed to reinforce pack law. Pryderi reached out, his small hand hovering near the statue's base. I could break it, he whispered. I can see how. Just a touch, a small pulse of magic, and the binding would shatter. Don't, Bedwer said sharply. Not yet. Breaking one monument would be noticed. We need to break them all at once, or not at all. Pryderi pulled his hand back, but his expression had changed. Where there'd been fear before, now there was something else. Understanding. And with it, the first spark of anger. They did this on purpose, he said. My parents, their parents, every alpha for 300 years. They knew what they were doing. They chose this system. Chose to enslave omegas. Chose to erase the old ways. Yes, Bedwer said simply. And my father. His grandmother was a keeper. He carries that blood. But he just accepted it. Became exactly what they wanted him to be. Survival sometimes requires compromise, Bedwer said carefully. Your great-grandmother had already lost everything. Her village, her family, her entire way of life. When she bonded to an alpha, when she hid what she was choosing life over death. You can't fault her for that. But she passed the blood on, Pryderi said. She could have refused to have children. Could have let the bloodline die with her. Instead he stopped, a new realization dawning. She was waiting, he breathed. Hoping it would resurface. That one day, someone would be born who could finish what the keepers started. Perhaps, Bedwer said. Or perhaps she just wanted her children to live, and hoped they'd never have to carry the burden she carried. He guided Pryderi back toward the wheelchair. Their hour was nearly up. Either way, he said, you're here now. The magic resurfaced in you. And what you do with that, that's your choice. Not your great-grandmother's. Not mine. Yours. Pryderi settled back into the wheelchair, but his mind was clearly racing. 6 days, he said. In 6 days I speak before the court. Claim my inheritance. And then your mother will move forward with the bonding, Bedwer finished. Unless we give her a reason not to. What reason? Bedwer smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We make you so perfect, so undeniably alpha, that bonding you young would be seen as a waste, he said. We make the court fall in love with you. Make them demand you be given freedom to choose your own mate when the time comes. Make any attempt to force a bond look like political maneuvering rather than parental wisdom. You want to use their own system against them, Pryderi said. Exactly, Bedwer said. The presentation is in 6 days. I need you to practice your speech. The words your parents have written for you are good, but we're going to make them better. More commanding. More alpha. So alpha that every person in that throne room will be thinking about your future reign, not your current vulnerability. The guards approached, signaling the end of their session. As Bedwer stood to leave, Pryderi caught his hand. Thank you, the child said quietly. For everything. For teaching me. For not lying to me about what we are. Bedwer looked down at him, and for a moment, something vulnerable crossed his face. Don't thank me yet, he said. What I'm teaching you, it's going to change your life in ways you can't imagine. Ways that may not always feel like gifts. There will be moments when you wish you'd never learned to see the bonds. Never learned what your kingdom is built on. I already wish I didn't know, Pryderi admitted. But I'd rather know the truth than live a comfortable lie. Spoken like a true keeper, Bedwer said softly. Then the guards were there, and he was escorted back to his chambers, leaving Pryderi alone in the garden with knowledge that should have died 300 years ago. That night, Rhiannon made her move. She summoned Bedwer to a private audience. No guards, no witnesses, just the two of them in a small study off the main library. It was irregular, potentially scandalous even, for a mated alpha to meet privately with an omega. But Rhiannon was queen, and queens made their own rules. Bedwer entered the study and found her standing by the window, her back to him. She was still in her formal court attire, silk and leather, gold and gems, but her hair was unbound, falling loose around her shoulders in a way that made her look younger, more vulnerable. "You wanted to see me, Your Majesty?" Bedwer said. She didn't turn around. "My son walks," she said. "He speaks. In 8 days, you've accomplished what dozens of physicians and healers couldn't do in 2 years. I should be grateful. But you're not," Bedwer said. Now she turned, and her eyes were blazing. "I'm terrified," she said. "Because I don't know what you did to him. I don't know what price you'll demand for this miracle. And I don't know if my son is truly healed or if you've just taught him to pretend." She crossed the room, stopping just inches from him. Close enough that he could feel the heat of her body, smell her scent. Alpha, powerful, dangerous. "So I'm going to ask you directly," she said. "And if you lie to me, if I even suspect you're lying, I will have you executed before dawn. Do you understand?" "Yes," Bedwer said calmly. "What did you do to my son?" Bedwer met her eyes steadily. "I taught him to accept what he is," he said. "Your physicians were trying to cure him of a defect that didn't exist. Your healers were trying to fix something that wasn't broken. But Pryderi wasn't sick. He was fighting himself. Fighting against expectations he couldn't meet while simultaneously being something he didn't understand." "Speak plainly," Rhiannon demanded. "Your son carries old magic," Bedwer said. "From before the pack laws. From before the purge. It's in his blood, his bones, his soul. You can't cure it any more than you can cure him of being your son. It's simply what he is." Rhiannon's hand moved to the knife at her belt. "You're saying my son is contaminated," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I'm saying your son is powerful," Bedwer corrected. "More powerful than any alpha born in the last 3 centuries. The magic inside him could reshape this kingdom if he learns to wield it properly. Or it could destroy him if he keeps fighting it. And you just happen to know how to help him," Rhiannon said. "You, a random omega with no pack, no history, no connections. You somehow knew exactly what my son needed." She stepped closer, the knife now visible in her hand. "Who are you really?" she asked. "And don't tell me you're just a healer who heard rumors. I've had you investigated, Bedwer. Do you know what my people found?" "I'm sure you're going to tell me," Bedwer said. "Nothing," Rhiannon said. "Absolutely nothing. You appeared at the southern border 17 years ago, were taken in by a family that conveniently died in a fire, and have been drifting between settlements ever since. No pack affiliations. No recorded magic. No history before age 7. Her eyes narrowed. "But I'm willing to bet you have a history," she said. "One you've worked very hard to erase. And I'm willing to bet that history connects to the village that was cleansed 17 years ago. The village that practiced forbidden magic. The village where Cadwalladen's grandmother was born." Bedwer said nothing, but something must have shown in his face because Rhiannon smiled coldly. "Yes," she said. "I know about my mate's bloodline. Cadwalladen doesn't. He never asked questions about his grandmother's past, never wanted to know. But I investigate everything that could threaten my family. And when you walked into my throne room, when I smelled your scent and saw the way my son reacted to you, I knew." She pressed the knife against his chest, not hard enough to cut but hard enough to make her point. "You're from that village," she said. "You're one of the contaminated bloodlines we were supposed to have eliminated. And now you're here in my castle, teaching my son magic that should have died with your people. If you knew all this," Bedwer said carefully, "why did you let me near him?" "Because he was dying," Rhiannon said, and for the first time her voice cracked. "Because every healer, every physician, every magical expert in the kingdom had failed. Because I was watching my son fade away, and I was desperate enough to try anything. Even something as dangerous as you." She pulled the knife back but kept it in her hand. "But now he's better," she said. "Now he walks, he speaks, he'll claim his inheritance. Which means I don't need you anymore. And keeping you alive is far too dangerous." "So you're going to kill me," Bedwer said. It wasn't a question. After the presentation, Rhiannon confirmed. My son needs to speak before the court, needs to be officially recognized as heir. Once that's done, once his position is secure, you'll be arrested on charges of sedition. There will be a trial, brief, public. You'll be executed within a week. She tilted her head, studying him. And you're not even surprised, she observed. You expected this. Of course I expected this, Bedwer said. You're an alpha. You protect your pack above all else. I'm a threat to your son, to your kingdom, to everything you've built. Killing me is the logical choice. Then why did you come here? Rhiannon asked. Why walk into certain death just to heal a child you'd never met? Bedwer was quiet for a long moment. Because he called me, he finally said. Because for 17 years I've been alone. The last of my kind. The last person alive who remembers what the world was like before the pack laws. And then I felt his magic. Desperate, lonely, powerful, and I realized I wasn't the last anymore. He met Rhiannon's eyes. I came here knowing I'd probably die, he said. But at least I'd die knowing there was someone else who carried the old magic. Someone who might survive long enough to remember what we were. Something flickered in Rhiannon's expression. Not sympathy exactly, but perhaps understanding. She lowered the knife. You care about him, she said. My son. This isn't just about preserving your magic or your history. You actually care what happens to him. Yes, Bedwer said simply. Rhiannon turned away, moving back to the window. Then you understand why I have to do this, she said. Why I can't let you live. Because if you care about my son, if you truly want what's best for him, then you know he can't grow up believing the old magic is acceptable. He can't become king thinking pack law is something to be questioned or reformed. He needs to be a strong alpha. A traditional alpha. Someone who will maintain order and stability. Someone who will never be fully himself, Bedwer said quietly. Someone who will survive, Rhiannon countered. Someone who will rule successfully and pass the throne to his own children. Isn't that more important than some abstract notion of authenticity? That depends, Bedwer said, on whether you think survival without selfhood is truly living. Rhiannon's shoulders tensed. You will not speak of this conversation to anyone, she said. Not my son, not my mate, not the guards. You will continue treating Pryderi until the presentation. You will make sure his speech is perfect, his performance flawless. And then you will accept your fate with dignity. And if I refuse? Bedwer asked. Then I'll have you executed tonight, Rhiannon said. And tell my son you tried to attack me. He'll be devastated, but he'll recover. Children are resilient. She finally turned to look at him again. So what will it be, Bedwer of no pack? Will you give me 6 more days, or do you die tonight? Bedwer considered his options. He could fight. His magic was strong enough to kill her before the guards could intervene. Could escape the castle, disappear into the countryside. But that would leave Pryderi alone, unprotected, vulnerable to whatever bonding Rhiannon had planned. 6 days, he said. Rhiannon nodded. Smart choice. Now get out of my sight. As Bedwer moved toward the door, she spoke again. One more thing, she said. I meant what I said about caring for my son. If in these final days you do anything to hurt him, physically, emotionally, magically, I won't wait for a trial. I'll kill you myself. Slowly. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, Your Majesty, Bedwer said. Then he was gone, leaving Rhiannon alone with her knife and her choices and the terrible knowledge that protecting her son might require destroying the only person who truly understood him. The next 5 days passed in a blur of preparation and pretense. Bedwer continued working with Pryderi every morning, refining his walk, perfecting his speech, teaching him subtle ways to manipulate the bond so he appeared more alpha than he actually was. The child learned quickly, frighteningly quickly, and by the day before the presentation, he could maintain the illusion for hours without strain. But there was a cost. Every evening, when the lessons ended and Bedwer returned to his chambers, He could feel the weight of what he was doing. He was teaching this child to be a perfect alpha, to embody everything the pack laws demanded, to become exactly what Rhiannon wanted. He was erasing the very magic he'd come to preserve. On the night before the presentation, Bedwyr stood on his balcony and seriously considered running. Just opening a portal, one of the forbidden skills he'd learned from his grandmother, and disappearing into the wilderness where no alpha could track him. But he couldn't, because tomorrow, Pryderi would stand before the entire court, would speak the words that claimed his birthright. And if Bedwyr wasn't there to help him maintain the illusion, the child's magic might slip, might reveal itself, and then everything would be over. So he stayed. And morning came. The throne room was packed. Every noble family in the kingdom had sent representatives. Merchants, craftspeople, farmers. Anyone with even minimal status had crowded into the castle for this moment. The heir to Gwynedd would speak for the first time, would claim his place in the succession, would prove himself worthy of the crown he'd one day wear. Pryderi entered the room in his wheelchair, pushed by 2 attendants. He wore miniature court attire, silk tunic in royal blue, leather vest, a small circlet resting on his golden curls. He looked every inch a prince. Bedwyr watched from a small alcove near the back, hidden from view but able to see everything. His heart pounded as Pryderi was positioned before the twin thrones where Cadwallon and Rhiannon sat. The High Counselor Owain stepped forward, his voice ringing through the chamber. By pack law and blood oath, we are gathered to witness the claiming of inheritance, he intoned. Prince Pryderi, second of his name, son of King Cadwallon and Queen Rhiannon, will speak before this court and claim his right as heir to the throne. The room fell absolutely silent. Pryderi's small hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stood. The crowd gasped. He took 1 step, then another, then a 3rd, 4th, 5th, walking steadily toward his parents' thrones. His legs were strong, his balance perfect, his bearing impossibly regal for a child not yet 3 years old. When he reached the base of the dais, he knelt, a smooth, controlled movement that showed no trace of the boy who, just days ago, had needed support to walk 3 steps. "Father," he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the vast room. "Mother, I stand before you and this court to claim what is mine by blood and by right. I am Pryderi of House Gwynedd. I am your son and heir, and I will serve this kingdom with every breath in my body, every thought in my mind, every beat of my heart." He rose, still steady, still perfect. "I have been blessed by the gods," he continued, and Bedwyr felt something twist in his chest because he'd helped write these words, these lies. "Blessed with healing, with strength, with the ability to lead. And I swear before all of you that I will use these gifts wisely. I will uphold pack law. I will honor the bonds that hold our society together. I will be the alpha this kingdom deserves." The crowd erupted in cheers. Cadwallon stood, moved down the dais, and pulled his son into an embrace. Rhiannon followed, tears streaming down her face, her hand on Pryderi's head. And Bedwyr, hidden in his alcove, felt something inside him break. Because the child wasn't just reciting words. He believed them. The magic had integrated so smoothly into his alpha persona that he'd started to see it as normal, natural, right? He'd taken everything Bedwyr taught him about hiding and surviving and had internalized it so completely that the mask was becoming the face. In saving Pryderi's life, Bedwyr had killed everything that made him special. The celebration lasted hours. Noble families lined up to congratulate the young prince. Musicians played. Food and wine flowed freely. And through it all, Pryderi held court like he'd been doing it his entire life. Gracious, charming, perfectly alpha. Bedwyr was summoned to the throne room near the end of the celebration. He entered to find the crowd had thinned, only close family and advisors remaining. Cadwallon gestured him forward. "Bedwyr," the king said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "You have given me back my son. There are no words sufficient to thank you. No reward great enough to match what you've done." "I require no reward, your majesty," Bedwyr said. Nevertheless, you'll have one, Cadwallon said. He glanced at Rhiannon, who nodded. I'm granting you freedom. Full Omega emancipation. You'll be the first in 3 centuries to hold such status. You may travel where you wish, own property, make contracts in your own name. You'll be subject to no pact, no alpha, no bond. The room went silent. Freedom. Real legal freedom. It was unheard of. Revolutionary. The kind of thing that could spark debates, challenges, perhaps even violence from traditionalist alphas who believed Omegas should never be autonomous. It was also a death sentence in disguise. Because an emancipated Omega with no pact protection would be vulnerable to any alpha who decided to challenge the king's decree. Bedwyr would be hunted, harassed, possibly killed within months of leaving the castle. And Rhiannon knew it. She stood, her expression carefully neutral. Additionally, she said, you're banished from Gwynedd. You may not return to this kingdom for any reason. If you're found within our borders after tonight, the emancipation will be revoked and you'll be executed for trespassing. There it was. The real punishment. Freedom without safety. Autonomy without protection. Your majesties are too generous, Bedwyr said, bowing low. You'll leave tonight, Cadwallon added. Immediately. We've prepared supplies, coin, traveling papers. You'll be escorted to the southern border and released there. As you command, Bedwyr said. He risked one last glance at Pryderi, who stood beside his mother's throne. The child's face was unreadable, perfectly controlled, perfectly alpha. But his eyes met Bedwyr's, and in them was something that looked like understanding. And perhaps, beneath that, the faintest trace of regret. Then Bedwyr was being escorted out, taken to his chambers to collect his few belongings, and marched through the castle toward the stables where a horse and provisions waited. He didn't see Pryderi again. Didn't get to say goodbye. Didn't get to warn him about what was coming. The bonding his mother would arrange, the slow erosion of his magic, the life of perfect conformity that awaited him. Within an hour, Bedwyr was beyond the castle walls, riding south with 4 guards who would make sure he reached the border. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind clouds, and the road stretched endlessly before him. He'd failed. All of it, the risk, the teaching, the hope, had been for nothing. Pryderi would grow up to be exactly what the pack laws demanded. Another Alpha King maintaining the system that had destroyed Bedwyr's people. The magic would die with Bedwyr after all. He pulled his horse to a stop so suddenly the guards behind him nearly collided with him. What are you doing? The lead guard demanded. Bedwyr didn't answer. He was reaching for his magic, deeper than he'd gone in years. Down to the core where his grandmother's final lessons lived. The forbidden skills she'd passed to him in those last moments. The knowledge he'd sworn never to use unless absolutely necessary. He found it. And smiled. I'm sorry, he said to the guards. Then he spoke a word in the old tongue, a word that predated pack law and pack bonds, a word that was magic itself. The guards collapsed from their horses, unconscious before they hit the ground. They weren't hurt. Bedwyr had made sure of that. But they'd sleep until dawn, and by then he'd be long gone. Not south to the border and exile. North. Back to the castle. 'Cause he'd just realized something. He'd taught Pryderi to see the bonds, to manipulate them, to hide his magic beneath layers of perfect alpha performance. But he'd also taught him how to break those bonds when the time was right. And he'd done it in such a way that no one, not Rhiannon, not Cadwallon, not even Owain with all his investigations, would suspect what Pryderi was truly capable of until it was far too late. The child wasn't lost, wasn't erased, wasn't becoming what they wanted him to be. He was waiting, playing the long game, being exactly what Bedwyr had trained him to be, a perfect infiltrator, someone who could operate within the system while secretly working to dismantle it from within. Bedwyr had spent 17 years alone, surviving, hiding, waiting for someone who could carry on the work his grandmother had started. And now he'd found that someone, a child who would grow up to be king, who would have more power, more resources, more opportunity to change things than Bedwyr ever could have dreamed. But only if Bedwyr survived long enough to guide him. To be there when Pryderi was ready to make his move. To help him when the time came to choose between the throne and the truth. So Bedwyr turned his horse north and rode hard into the darkness, toward the one place no one would think to look for a banished Omega. The ruins of his village. The place where it all began. The place where, perhaps, it would all end. Or begin again. In the castle, Pryderi lay in his chambers, staring at the ceiling. His parents thought he was asleep. The guards outside his door certainly did. But he was wide awake, his magic sight active, watching the bonds that crisscrossed the castle like a massive web of control. He could see his parents' bond, strong, ancient, unbreakable. Could see the bonds connecting his father to the throne, to the land, to every noble family sworn to their service. Could see the smaller bonds between servants and masters, guards and commanders, every person in this castle locked into their position in the hierarchy. It was beautiful in its complexity, and absolutely terrifying. Bedwyr was gone now, banished, possibly already dead if his mother had sent assassins after him despite her promises. But before he'd left, in their final session in the garden, he'd done something neither of his parents knew about. He'd shown Pryderi the master bond. The original spell woven 300 years ago that had created Pack Law itself. The magical structure that forced alphas to dominate, omegas to submit, and everyone to believe it was natural rather than imposed. It lived deep beneath the castle, in the dungeons no one spoke about, carved into the foundation stone of the throne itself, fed by the blood and pain of every omega who'd been broken to maintain it over the centuries. And Bedwyr had shown Pryderi exactly how to destroy it. Not now. Not while he was still a child, still vulnerable, still learning. But one day when he was king, when he had the power and the position to remake everything. That day was coming. Pryderi closed his eyes and reached for the bond his mother planned to force on him. Could see it already being prepared, woven by court mages in a tower somewhere in the castle. A bond to a young alpha daughter from the Carnarvon pack. Powerful bloodline, impeccable reputation, already showing signs of dominant magic. The perfect match for a future king. Except Pryderi could see the flaws in the bond's construction. Could see exactly where to place barriers, how to accept it while keeping his core self untouched. His mother thought she was protecting him, securing his future. She was actually giving him the perfect cover. A bonded prince, walking and speaking, performing flawlessly in court. No one would suspect what he really was. What he was planning. What he would eventually do. Not until it was far too late to stop him. Pryderi smiled in the darkness and let sleep finally claim him. Tomorrow, his mother would announce the bonding contract. The day after, they'd begin the ceremonial preparations. Within a month, he'd be tied to another alpha family, locked into the system. And that's exactly where he needed to be. The best way to destroy a system Bedwyr had taught him was from the inside. With patience. With planning. With perfect, flawless deception. Pryderi had walked for the first time 8 days ago. He'd spoken for the first time before the court tonight. And in 15 years, when he took the throne, he'd speak again. Words that would shatter every bond in the kingdom. Words that would break the master spell. Words that would end Pack Law forever and return magic to what it had been before the alphas twisted it into chains. Bedwyr had given him everything he needed. Now all he had to do was survive long enough to use it. 3 months later, in the ruins of a village that no longer appeared on any map, Bedwyr stood before a stone altar that had somehow survived the fires. He'd been right. No one thought to look for him here. The place was considered cursed, contaminated, too dangerous for even the most desperate travelers. Which made it perfect. He'd spent the months since his banishment reconstructing what he could. Salvaging books and tools from hidden caches his grandmother had created. Practicing spells he'd been too afraid to attempt while in the castle. Reaching out with his magic across the kingdom. Carefully, subtly, searching for others. And he'd found them. Not many. A dozen, perhaps 15 omegas scattered across Gwynedd, who carried traces of the old magic. Most didn't even know what they were. They just knew they were different, didn't quite fit into Pack Law's neat categories, felt something churning beneath their skin that had no name. Bedwer was teaching them to recognize it, to hide it, to survive, and to wait. Because in 15 years, when Pryderi took the throne, they would need to be ready. Ready to support him when he made his move. Ready to help rebuild after the system collapsed. Ready to remember what magic had been before the Pack Laws bound it. It was a long game, dangerous, with 1,000 ways it could fail. But it was the only game worth playing. Bedwer placed his hand on the altar stone and felt the echo of his grandmother's magic still lingering there. She'd stood here the night the soldiers came. Had known she was going to die. Had chosen to pass everything to him instead of destroying the knowledge to keep it from being tortured out of her. "I found him," Bedwer whispered to the empty ruins. "The child you told me to watch for. The one who carries both bloodlines. He's everything you said he'd be, powerful, clever, brave. And he's going to change everything." The wind picked up, swirling through the broken buildings, and for just a moment, Bedwer could swear he felt her presence. Her approval, or hope. "I won't fail you," he promised. "I won't fail him. Whatever it takes, however long it takes. We'll finish what you started. We'll break the bonds. We'll free everyone." He pulled his hand back from the altar and turned to face the path leading out of the ruins. Somewhere in the castle, a toddler who'd learned to walk and speak was learning now to play a much more dangerous game. Learning to be the perfect prince while secretly preparing to become the king who would end kings. And somewhere in the dungeons beneath that castle, in rooms where screams were swallowed by stone and blood soaked into ancient foundations, the master spell pulsed and thrummed with the power of 3 centuries of suffering. It thought itself eternal, unbreakable. It had no idea that its destruction had already been set in motion by an Omega who should have died 17 years ago and a child who should never have existed. The spell would learn. They all would. Because the toddler had never spoken, until the Omega sat beside his wheelchair and whispered his name. His true name. The name that meant destroyer of old orders in the ancient tongue. The name that promised revolution. And that whisper, that single moment in a garden 3 months ago, had changed everything. The Alphas just didn't know it yet. But they would. Oh, they would. In the throne room of Gwynnett's castle, High Counselor Owain stood before a table covered in reports, maps, and carefully annotated intelligence. He'd spent 3 months investigating Bedwer, tracking every moment of his time in the castle, analyzing every word he'd spoken to Pryderi, consulting with experts on old magic, forbidden spells, and the history of the Purge. And he'd finally found it. The piece that made everything click into place. A reference in a restricted text, barely a footnote about the Keepers. About their prophecy. About a child who would be born carrying both bloodlines, Alpha and Keeper, and who would have the power to undo the work of centuries. Owain had dismissed it as myth when he first read it. Ancient superstition, nothing more. But now, looking at his compiled evidence, the dates, the bloodlines, the magic Pryderi displayed, he couldn't dismiss it anymore. The prince wasn't just touched by old magic. He was the prophecy. And Bedwer hadn't been healing him. He'd been training him. Preparing him for something far more dangerous than anyone had suspected. Owain's hands trembled slightly as he gathered the reports. He needed to tell the king and queen immediately. Needed to explain what their son really was. Needed to recommend action before it was too late. But as he reached for the door, he hesitated. If he revealed this, if he told Cadwallon and Rhiannon that their son was prophesied to destroy Pack Law itself, what would they do? Would they love him enough to accept it? To let him live despite the threat he represented? Or would they do what Alpha parents had always done when faced with children who didn't fit the hierarchy? Would they erase him? Owain stood frozen, his hand on the door handle, reports clutched in his other hand, facing the most important decision of his political career. Protect the system that had given him power, wealth, and status. Or protect a child who'd done nothing wrong except be born into a prophecy he didn't choose. The door opened before he could decide. Pryderi stood in the doorway, barely tall enough to reach the handle. His golden eyes meeting Owain's with an intensity that should have been impossible in a child not yet 3 years old. "High Counselor," the prince said, his voice perfectly calm. "My father sent me to find you. He wants to discuss the upcoming bonding ceremony." Owain looked down at the child, at the prince, the prophecy made flesh, and realized with a chill that ran down his spine. Child knew Owain had discovered the truth, knew what those reports contained, knew exactly what decision the High Counselor was wrestling with, and had come to make sure Owain made the right choice. "Of course, Your Highness," Owain heard himself say. "Let me just file these reports first." He turned back to his desk, very aware of the small child watching his every move. He could destroy the reports, burn them, pretend he'd never discovered anything, go to the king with nothing but praise for his remarkable son. Or he could take them with him, show Cadwallon and Rhiannon the truth, let them decide their son's fate. His hands hovered over the papers. "The bonding ceremony will be beautiful," Pryderi said conversationally. "Mother has planned everything perfectly. The Carnarvon pack is thrilled. Everyone's saying it's the perfect match." Owain's jaw clenched. The child was giving him an out, reminding him that there was a normal, safe path forward. A path where Pryderi was just a prince, the bonding was just politics, and everything continued as it always had. "It will be a great honor for both families," Owain agreed carefully. "Yes," Pryderi said. "A great honor. And you'll be there, won't you? To witness it. To be part of history." The emphasis on that last word was so slight, so subtle, that anyone else would have missed it. But Owain didn't miss it. The child was asking him to choose. Right now. In this moment. Be part of the history that maintained the system. Or be part of the history that would eventually tear it down. Owain looked at the reports one last time. Saw his grandmother's face in his mind. She'd been an Omega, had died in the birthing bed delivering his mother, had never known her grandson would rise to become High Counselor, had never imagined an Omega's descendant could achieve such power within the system. What would she think of his choice? Would she want him to protect the system that had killed her? Or would she want him to protect the child who might finally end it? Owain made his decision. He picked up the reports, carried them to the fireplace, and dropped them into the flames. Watched them curl and blacken and turn to ash. Watched 3 months of investigation, of evidence, of truth disappear as if it had never existed. When he turned back, Pryderi was smiling. Not the practiced smile he showed in court. Something else. Something older. Something that looked like recognition. "Shall we go see my father?" the child asked, holding out his small hand. Owain stared at that hand for a long moment. Knew that taking it would be a commitment. Conspiracy. A choice that would define the rest of his life. Then he took it. And together, the High Counselor and the prophesied prince walked through the castle toward the throne room, toward a future neither of them could fully predict, but both of them had chosen to help create. Behind them in the fireplace, the reports burned. And deep beneath the castle, in dungeons no one spoke of, the master spell pulsed with power. Unaware that in 15 years, a king would speak words that would end its existence. Unaware that in a ruined village to the north, an Omega was gathering forces. Unaware that in the very heart of the castle, a child was learning patience. The spell thought itself eternal. Was wrong. But it would be 15 years before it learned that truth. 15 years of playing perfect prince. 15 years of hiding in plain sight. 15 years of preparation. And then the toddler who'd never spoken would speak again. And this time his words would break the world. The coronation of King Pryderi was the grandest event in Gwynette's history. Every noble family attended. Every pack sent representatives. The throne room glittered with jewels and silk, and the combined magic of hundreds of alphas all gathered to witness the transition of power. Cadwallon, now old and weary, placed the crown on his son's head with hands that shook slightly. Rhiannon, still beautiful despite the years, stood beside her mate with tears in her eyes. And Pryderi, 18 years old, tall and strong and impossibly charismatic, knelt before them with perfect grace. "Do you swear to uphold pack law?" Cadwallon asked, his voice carrying through the vast chamber. "I do," Pryderi said. "Do you swear to maintain the bonds that hold our kingdom together?" "I do." "Do you swear to honor the hierarchies established by our ancestors?" Pryderi looked up at his father, at his mother, at the hundreds of nobles watching with eager anticipation. "I do," he said. The crown settled on his head. The court erupted in cheers. Musicians began playing the royal anthem. And as King Pryderi stood for the first time, his eyes swept across the crowd and found a face in the very back of the room. A face that shouldn't be there, that had been banished 15 years ago, that everyone believed was dead or fled to distant lands. Bedwyr stood in the shadows, wearing the clothes of a servant, his hair now gray at the temples but his amber eyes as bright as ever, their gazes locked. And Bedwyr smiled. "Not yet," that smile said. But not yet. First let them celebrate. Let them believe everything was normal. Let them think pack law was safe for another generation. Then, when they were comfortable, then they would learn what the toddler had always known. That some silences, when finally broken, could shatter entire worlds. King Pryderi smiled back. And deep beneath his feet, in dungeons no one spoke of, the master spell pulsed one last time. Unaware that its destruction was mere days away. Unaware that the king it thought it controlled was actually its executioner. Unaware that revolution had been 15 years in the making. The spell's time was ending. And a new age. One without chains, without forced bonds, without hierarchies carved into the very